Well, listen, good morning, everybody, and also to friends and colleagues who are joining us at distance. That little round table was really helpful because it tells me what you want out of the session and allows me to duck and dive a little bit. All I want out of the session is to provoke enough thoughts and ideas in the next 20 minutes that we have a great discussion, both here in the room and also with colleagues who are tuning in all over the world, as they say. So I love talking about businesses and business growth and how businesses thrive and survive. So I'm delighted to be here talking about non-exec directors. And it's great that they're actually really on your minds as well, rather than something over here that's in the background. Whenever I think about non-exec directors, particularly in social businesses, I think about this quote. And this quote, by the way, just as an aside, is from a guy called Seth Godin. If you get nothing else out of this morning, go and immerse yourself in Seth Godin. Straight talking New York guy, brilliant entrepreneur, the best marketer in the world, full of wonderful ideas about how to grow businesses. I'd be really disappointed if the only thing you got out of today was the name of Seth Godin, but I give you a kind of minimalist take for the value that you get out of today. In all seriousness, for me, and I just wanted to tell you where I'm coming from on non-exec directors, for me, if you can't create as a leader of a business an environment in which your non-exec directors are integrated and playing a full part, and as the quote says here, you've created a platform for them to operate, then for me, that's a failure of leadership. And it is seriously as simple as that. So that's where I'm coming from. And that quote always comes to me whenever I think about non-exec directors. So the title of this morning is The Power of Non-Exec Directors. What the hell does that mean? This is really quite unnerving every time I make a... It's okay, Graham, it's fine. What the hell does that mean? At their best, non-exec directors sprinkle gold dust all over your organization. Through your people, through your processes, and as ambassadors for your business. They are absolutely priceless. They are a very high value currency. They're not some sort of compliance thing that you have to please regulators or to please some governance requirement. They are essential parts of the business where they work really well. Above all else, they bring commercial acumen. Now, you can't have enough commercial acumen in a business. It's impossible. And anybody thinks there's a limit on that is always wrong. And fantastic non-exec directors bring this in spades, in absolute spades. They bring experience, and most of the evidence about where non-exec directors work best in terms of their experience is they help you when it goes wrong because they've been through it before. It's not exclusively why experience is important, but it's a big factor. They bring judgment. There are two elements to this. One is you can rely on them to make fabulous judgment calls when you've got a big judgment call to make yourself. They're wonderful at that because it's what they do. But secondly, they help you become a better judge so that you become a better decision maker. And again, that's invaluable. They're challenging. So one of the common themes, and you'll hear a bit more about this from me in a moment, about where NEDs don't work is because the CEOs hate being challenged. They like comfortable people around them who won't radically challenge them. And then ergo, they appoint people who don't challenge them. They don't get challenged, and then they moan that the NEDs aren't adding value. So there's a whole thing here about wonderful chief execs and wonderful NEDs working together where challenge but collegiate behavior is part of the mix. And I want to talk about leadership for a moment. You'd expect me to do that given where we are and what we're talking about. Good NEDs are leaders in their own right. So they inject into your business extra leadership if you allow them, going back to my quote, or not my quote, but the Seth Godin quote, if you give them permission and the space to do it, but they will help you by being great coaches and great mentors. They will help you become a better leader. And that seems fundamentally important. And a final thought just on the power before we get into what the hell do you do with NEDs. The power is really interesting when you ask people what's their perspective on NEDs. And you talk about the assets of a business, they'll talk about people, they'll talk about the money, they'll talk about intellectual property, they'll talk about physical property, they'll talk about balance sheets. Hardly anybody stands up and says, and you know, a key asset in our business is we've got the best NEDs that you could possibly recruit. So I would urge you to have a mindset shift that when you think about the assets you're building in the businesses you lead, that a key asset is fabulous non-exec directors. So that's a bit about the power, but the frequent reality, and it is very frequent, and Craig hinted at this at the beginning, that this is a growing problem in the social business sector. And I've heard a couple of you already this morning saying that not all your experiences have been all positive, but it is a growing issue, a growing challenge. The frequent reality is that people are very disappointed with their non-exec directors, and then they go through a kind of continuum of escalation. So they then get frustrated because the non-exec directors aren't doing what they think they should be doing, and some of the NEDs get frustrated as well. And that often escalates into resentment and a whole kind of dysfunctionality that none of us want to go anywhere near. So whilst the potential of NEDs is fabulous, the reality is more often than not poor experience, and it really doesn't have to be like this. Now, to bring that to life for a moment, I just wanted to share with you the typical experiences that I see and hear and am often involved in when people ask me to talk to them and help them make their boards more functional and improve their non-exec directors. And it's in the form of 4 typologies. The first, which is a typical category, are the defensive NEDs. Now, these are people who love governance and audit and compliance. They just love it. They eat it up, and the more you give them, the more they want to be involved. They are people who self-present as guardians of risk. So they think their big role in life is to manage risk. And often that blurs absolutely everything else. They're meeting junkies in the sense that when they go home at night, they believe the value they've added is they've been to one of your meetings, and that participation in the meeting is their value. As opposed, of course, to what insight did I bring today? What decision did I help being made? What turn of direction did I facilitate? None of that generally occurs. And they oppose change. And I've used this phrase, and Craig's heard it once from me before, about attack dogs. These kind of people who tend in parallel to be school governors, they tend to come in and also in parallel be on NHS kind of boards. There's nothing wrong with that. They're doing a great job over there, but they bring all that world into your social business. And they think in black and white terms. They think that's how a board runs. That's how non-execs operate. So I'll bring that world into your world. So there's a kind of transfusion going on, but they oppose change. They become attack dogs when people propose radical change. It's kind of the polar opposite of what you want from a good non-exec director. And I call these people the inertia NEDs. They stifle entrepreneurialism. And it seems to me that is not what you want. The next of the 4 categories are the interferers. Now, these people are deeply uncomfortable with strategy. They love operational mechanics and the day-to-day. They'll crawl all over your day job. They're managers, not leaders, so they love anything that's managerial. If they can duplicate what you're doing, it makes them feel safe. So if they can piggyback with you while you do something, and they can be associated with it, they think that's great. And these people are deeply, deeply dysfunctional, really dysfunctional. And I call these the trespassing NEDs. So for me, these are the trespassing NEDs. The third are the sycophants. Now, these people, again, are the opposite of what you want. They're very uncritical friends. They tend to avoid being involved in decisions, but applaud everything you do from the sidelines with great enthusiasm, with the implicit idea that everything you're doing is right and that their job is to cheerlead and to go out and tell other people outside the organization that you're wonderful and everything you're doing is great. Now, listen, we all know who these kind of people are. And there's a couple of things that almost always occur with these people. One is they tend to be generally from the sector that you operate in, and that's been their route in. So they've come via an acquaintance of an acquaintance or a contact of an acquaintance who is already deeply immersed in your sector. And if you ever get 5 minutes and you feel like doing it, go round and have a look at the boards of social businesses that are sector businesses rather than multi-sector businesses, and you will find in educational social enterprises lots of teachers, in social care social businesses lots of nurses and former nurses, or clinicians or people who've practiced social care. There's nothing wrong with a sprinkling of some of that. It's when you find that 6 out of the 7 NEDs are like that. And these people are sycophants. And they're self-interested. And this is something else that I would encourage you to look at with your own eyes. Lots of these people sit on boards and are quite naked about promoting their own self-interest. So being on the board is about them and what they get out of it. They're often running consulting businesses on the side. They're often public speakers and writers. And if they can get a couple of roles, particularly if they can become your chair, it enhances all the other stuff they do. But they don't want to damage the relationship because all of that's really important to them. So they are sycophantic in their behavior. I see this every day all over the place in social businesses. I see it less in the corporate world, although it does happen. It's a feature of social business NEDs. And I call those the chumocracy NEDs. And the fourth, just to bring this to life for a minute, lots of NEDs in social businesses are just out of their depth. They don't get your environment at all. They've been schooled in a traditional line management environment of how to tell people what to do, managing through a hierarchy. They're only really comfortable with outputs, not outcomes. And they don't like ambiguity. So they don't like this entrepreneurial path that lots of you have to be on, which is you head off in a direction, but you're not actually sure where you're going to end up. They hate that. And because these people are out of their depth, I call these the drowning NEDs. They are absolutely no use at all. These are typical experiences with no specific examples for reasons that are fairly obvious. That's what the world is like in relation to NEDs very often. This slide thing's now not working. Somebody could help me with that. There we are. That's fine. No, it doesn't like this slide. So listen, if you find yourself with NEDs that are like that, so like any of those 4 typologies or mixtures, understand it's not inevitable. It's not acceptable. It doesn't have to be like that. And to be honest, and I'm hoping now that the slide will work, I'll try it once more to see if it will work. But as well as understanding that, this is what you should do. You should just fire them. Please don't waste your time trying to change the behavior of people who are dysfunctional, have the wrong experience, and are not going to help your business. So in a dignified way, manage them out. Right, it's working again now. So if you're in the situation of having to replace NEDs, and we've already heard from some colleagues this morning that you are in that position, here are 7 quick tips for how to do that properly. The second bullet point on here is going to annoy one of our colleagues, and I'm not going to apply. Well, we haven't seen the second point. Okay. It's been paged down, has it? Okay. Sorry, I hadn't realized you got the slides in front of you. That's news to me. Very good. Don't budge from your must-haves. So it's not like when you recruit someone who's an executive where you can compromise on something they didn't bring to the recruitment process and you can help them address that development area or whatever it might be. You're not working with these people day to day. So if they don't bring everything you want, don't hire them. Don't ever budge from what you must have from a non-exec director. That is so important. It really is so important. You've all seen the second point. With the greatest of respect, and I work with recruitment firms regularly on other things, I would never, ever use a recruitment firm to hire a NED for two reasons. One is they encourage you to compromise on your requirements because they don't get paid unless somebody gets hired. And they don't do that maliciously, and I'm not alleging bad behavior. That's just a symptom of the dynamic of the relationship. More perniciously with NEDs, and this is particularly an issue in the regions, but it is an issue nationally as well. They have people that they already want you to hire, and they will feed them into the recruitment process. They have networks of non-exec directors. To be fair, there are companies that only do non-exec director recruitment, and they are the worst examples of this because they only survive on their, what we used to call the filer facts. So I would never use recruitment firms. Happy to discuss that. Force a pitch. I'm fed up, sick to the back teeth of people looking at CVs, having interviews, talking to people about their experience, and then making a judgment about whether they hire them. You want people in your business as non-exec directors who really are busting a gut to come and work with you. So make them sell themselves. Make them come in and tell you what their business case is to work with you. Make them tell you the value they will bring to your business. And if you're not convinced, don't hire them. Hardly anybody makes non-exec directors do a proper pitch. You know, they line them up, trial by Volivant, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because lots of NEDs are very socially adept. But you don't learn very much from that. I would always insist on a role play. So I would get an excellent professional to frame a role play for you, and I would have your NEDs enact it with you so that you can observe and participate with them on a real business issue, and it can be a real one that you are grappling with, where you are imagining what you'll get from a non-exec director. And then you can test their emotional intelligence. You can test how they talk to you, how they interact with colleagues, and you can test really what knowledge and experience they are bringing to the table. If you don't do it, it's bonkers. Multiple references is a really interesting one. If you're hiring an employee who's day-to-day, then the references you get tend to be really knowledgeable if you can get a proper reference from someone, because the referee has worked with the individual lots. They've spent lots of time with them. With non-exec directors, often the referee over a typical year has spent less than a couple of days with them. So you don't get a lot from references, so you need more of them. If you don't take 5 or 6 references for a non-exec director, you're mad. Well, you're not mad. Nobody's mad here, but it's not a very sensible thing to do. I'll say a bit more about performance management later on briefly, but a theme of some of my remarks today is you're managing them, they're not managing you. Very often when I get called in to help with non-exec directors, one of my first questions to the CEO is, can you share with me, please, your performance management framework for your NEDs? So people look at me in despair and think, what's that? Can you show me, please, your appraisal of the performance of the NEDs last year? Oh, we don't do that. Oh, right, okay. So how do you judge what value they're giving? It's all in my head. And I give it some thought at Christmas time. Do proper performance management. I'm not going to labor that, but it is so important. And here's one which I truly, truly believe in as much as the other points. Don't ever hire NEDs on multiple year contracts. Put them on annual contracts that are renewable based on performance. Why would you appoint a NED for a 2 or 3 year term? Why would you do that? Now, in the corporate world, there are regulatory reasons why you might want to do that. But in social businesses, you're not so constrained. So why would you do it? I really do want to ask you to ask yourselves, why are we locked into this culture of multi-year appointments? There's no need for it. If you haven't got these dysfunctional NEDs and you haven't got a need to rehire, and it could be that you don't need to rehire all NEDs, It could be you. The reason why non-exec directors aren't working is it could be you. And here's a couple of thoughts. First of all, do you need to grow up? Two aspects to this. One is lots of CEOs descend into a kind of infantilism, a student-teacher kind of relationship, where they think the NEDs are there to be honoured, and it's a great privilege that they're there, and that you should look up to them. They're peers. It's a peer-to-peer relationship. It's nothing more than that. If they're great, but don't be a child about it. And the second is, do you need to mature your view of what NEDs are really there for? And often that's expanding your ambition for the role that they can play, which takes us back to the original quote. Have you codified your demands? So do you really know? Lots of us know what the problems might be, but have you really sat down and understood exactly what you want from your non-exec directors? And I mean in specific terms. So for instance, if you're renewing your strategy, do you want the NEDs to own that? Do you want them to drive that? Or do you want them to do something else in the business, like a financial rescue or whatever it is? It's no good working with non-exec directors if you don't know what you want them for. And the complaints that I get, so I've been doing a bit of attacking of dysfunctional NEDs, but in their defense, a lot of NEDs that I speak to are just in despair as to they don't really understand what the CEO wants them to do. And that's not a great place to be, because you can lose really good people. Do you properly invest? And this came up a bit in the quick introductions. I think it was you raised it to start with, about how do you make sure that the non-exec directors are sufficiently on board all the time so that when you need them, they're up to date, up to speed, you're giving them the right information. You have to invest in the same way as you invest with all your employees when you can, and particularly your direct reports. You really have to invest with non-exec directors. It's not good enough to send them papers just before a meeting and perhaps pick up the phone a few weeks before the meeting. It doesn't work like that. This is a regular conversation, and you want to encourage them to be doing the same with you. Updates about the sector, insights that they can bring. There's a real level of investment here which is misunderstood. Do you feed back? This is back to my mindset thing. You are managing these people. So if they're performing really well, tell them. And if they're not performing quite so well, feed back to them and work out how it can be better in the future. But have this mentality that you are managing these people. And again, it's very often absent. And you wrap all that together, and we could talk about this all morning, about your own behaviors and your own worldview of non-exec directors. But ultimately, it comes back to the quote at the beginning. Are you demonstrating enough leadership to get the best out of your non-exec directors? So here's 3 or 4 concluding remarks, because we're covering a lot of ground, and my role really is to try and provoke a discussion and to hear your own stories about where you're at. First of all, just be ruthless on mishires. I'm going to say it once more. I really urge you, don't waste your time with dysfunctional NEDs. If they're dysfunctional, manage them out. You'll get far more value from replacing them, far more value. Recruit to succeed. So change how you recruit, think more carefully about how you recruit, and follow some of the tips that I have shared and other insights from your own learning about recruitment. And fundamentally, this is back to leadership. So think about your own behaviors, because very often it is CEO behavior that is the fundamental reason why NEDs don't work. And it's oh so easy to blame the NEDs. Oh so easy to blame the NEDs. And it's about leadership. And that quote at the beginning runs all the way through my whole mindset about NEDs. A failure to create the space for brilliant NEDs to work is a failure of leadership. And in this case, as many of you are CEOs, it's a failure of your own leadership. So you have to make it happen. And at that point, I'm just watching the slides move. I hope we have a really good discussion. Thank you.